Personas, they're a very useful modeling tool that we can use to capture, to bring together the different types of goal and motivation that we find within our user body. So in this section, we're going to have a bit of a delve into what personas are and why they're useful. Now, in terms of definition, they're abstract user models. So they're not real people, they're an abstraction of our users. And any sort of abstraction, we throw away some information and we keep other information. So in terms of the things that we're keeping within our persona, well, it's the most useful user attitudes, desires, needs, relationships, and behaviors. The key information for us, that's what we retain. And other things we get rid of, we don't need. So user aspects that are unimportant for whatever application we're talking about, we exclude them from our persona. So they give us a focused way, a way of focusing in on what's important, and they give us a way then of then using that persona to talk about, to reason about, to better understand how we'll design our application to interact with that type of individual. Now, they're not a work of fiction. Whilst we will create personas and they're not real people, they're not fictional entities in some sense. Instead, they are based on what we learn and know and discover from real people, so from real users. So in us creating a persona, we do bring together our real users, we understand their views, and then we look for where that commonality resides, and that's what we use to populate our personas. Because across a large user population, you might have different types or flavors of user. It doesn't mean you have one single persona. It's not unusual to have 3, 4, 5, 6 personas, and they represent important user characteristics or types of user that may end up using whatever the software is. And one of the things to say at the bottom of the piece of text here really is quite important, is that for creating our personas is something that does require us to do extensive investigation and to apply rigor to. And we've seen this in the last video when we're talking about understanding the goals that our users have. We need to be careful in terms of how we investigate it. And if we do that, and we do that properly in terms of the investigation, we'll get a rich set of data that we can then rigorously apply to create our personas. So why are they useful? So there's a key reason why they're useful. And then there's a number of things to help them avoid, but we'll look at the key reason first of all. If we have our group of users, users are simply diverse. They tend to be diverse in terms of their particular values or needs or goals. There may be some things in common, but there'll also be some things in part. And if we try to design our product so that it is everything to all people, doesn't matter what type of user and what type of goals they have, we'll design our product for them. The reality is that's likely to end up with a slightly confusing mess that doesn't really cater to anybody. A better approach is to say, out of all of our users, okay, what represents their views? What's the typical view? And we'll take what we can define as those typical common views, and we'll design our application around their specific needs. So we're focusing in on those common views. We're making sure we design our application that works really, really well for those common needs and common goals. And that's our priority. And then once we've done that, we think about those other sort of secondary needs and goals. Now, it's not to say they're less important, but it is to say they are less frequently encountered across our population of users. But we then look at the secondary goals and we then think about how do we integrate them into the system, but not doing so in a way that compromises the efficiency, the clarity, the simplicity that we've set up around the primary, the more commonly encountered goal. And personas give us a really powerful tool that we can use for capturing, for modeling, for thinking about those representative users. So how do we use personas? So whenever we have them, there are types of things that we can then ask questions of them. We can take a persona and we could say, well, based on that, how would this persona, this sort of abstract person, how would they behave? We can use them when we are talking to stakeholders or developers or designers in terms of us being able to communicate why certain decisions are making, to say for this particular persona we've done things in this way because this is going to be better for them. And it also then gives us a chance to engage in role playing as well. So whenever we're thinking about maybe we should change the design to do this or have the flow altered in this way, we can role play how a particular persona might perceive or react inside that type of environment. They also help us, and these are some of the key important benefits, to avoid certain types of behavior. And one is to avoid the idea of an elastic user, where we just use the idea of a user. Just simple concept. We talked about our users and that's that. The problem with that is that it becomes elastic. So if I'm talking about it, I'll have a certain set of assumptions that I'll have in my mind that I attach to the word user. If you're talking about it, you may have a slightly different set of assumptions and you'll attach that to the term user. So we're using the same term user, but what we mean by user differs and changes, so it becomes elastic. It fits the views and assumptions of whomever is talking, and that's risky. It also avoids the issue of self-referential designs, where we just think about, well, what would I do in that situation? And then we become the representative user. We may not be a representative user. And it's important then to avoid us unduly thinking about, well, what would be important for me if I were using the software in this particular manner. It also gives an opportunity then to focus on the design in the most important bits and to identify things which are edge cases where we don't have to put that much design effort into them relative to what we do put in for the core design elements. So they're useful then to enable us to decide for a particular item or aspect, how much emphasis do we attach to this? Now, personas are real users. This is a question because you could use both. To a degree, personas are an abstraction. They're not a real user. We've got to kind of infer or think about how they would behave, but we could also take a real user and ask that real user how he or she would act or behave. Now, the risk of using real users is that you get an actual person, and that actual person will have a certain set of views or beliefs and goals. Some of those may be representative and quite broadly shared across users in general. Some may be quite idiosyncratic to that individual user. And that's a risk then, that it can be hard to if you take an individual user, to untangle what is commonly observed across the wider population and what is particular idiosyncratic to that user. Personas, because they're composite archetypes, they only hold on to things that are common, and anything that is a little bit sort of unique or less common, they're excluded from the persona. So it avoids one of those aspects of risk of using participatory design, where we have the users directly involved in the design process. So having talked about and identified then the benefits, the roles, and the use of personas, what are they? Basically, you see a couple of examples here. Personas are nothing more than sort of a card with some information that's written on them, and that sort of compactness is quite important. The types of things that we have, typically we need to have a photo. So this brings it helps visualize who that individual is, and we'll be referring to our personas. Again, we may have more than one, so a photo helps identify it as a bit of believability to it. And ideally we want to take the photo in a natural setting, something that's ideally related to the setting in which the application would be done. We don't want an overly posed or polished picture, something that looks natural, something that looks believable. We want to have a name as well, so we will refer to the persona by its name or the name that we attach to it. And again, that's useful because it gives us a label that we can use to talk about, how Sue might do this particular task, or how Trevor might approach it in a slightly different way. Generally speaking, you want to pick names that don't map onto existing team members, so they should be names that that are neutral in terms of the connotation. We want to give an edge, a location, an occupation. they're going to be fictional things, but they should be reflective of average or typical values amongst their users. And again, it just helps the development that this is reflective of a real person. So it's filling in details, but it makes it more believable, and that's important. A key bit is a biography, and that holds a compelling, a believable story, and that story is about what's important to that person, what they would do, how they might use the software. And really important that what we capture through that is our fragments of conversations that we get from real users. That is again, that biography is almost a composite of actual things that users have told us. So it must be believable. It has to capture the key needs, desires, and motivations from actual users. That's how we build into this what type of persona this is, and it's what we build in, how we build in and capture the sort of representative common behaviors. Now, that's your starter. So personas typically have those. You can add in whatever else you need to add in that is relevant to a particular application. But key thing is, we're not talking about giving somebody a 20-page document and asking them to read through. It should comfortably fit on a sort of a card, maybe a reasonably large card, be easily digested, be easily understood. And sometimes you might get into providing sort of frustrations or teasing out the individual ones, or providing a comment or something that you might have heard from a real user. You want to make these as believable as possible. So that's all we want to look at in terms of personas. They really are quite powerful and really useful tools. So I'm certainly encourage you to think about developing them as part of your projects. In the section after this, we're going to go on to look at a number of sort of design tools that we can use. So when we've gone through, we've understood the goals of our users, we've created our personas, what other tools then can we use to help establish the particular flows and structures that ultimately will result in an interface and an application coming together?